Hey guys, this is your host Thomas Tyree here from On the Hot Podcast. Today, this will be the Combat Series episode number 114 for you guys today. And to kick off this week's Combat Series, I'll be discussing the fight that took place last night in the main event of UFC 319 between Dricus Du Plessis and Khamzat Chimaev. So, in the main event of UFC 319, a new chapter was written in the middleweight division with Khamzat Chimaev defeating Dricus Du Plessis by unanimous decision to become the new undisputed middleweight champion in the main event of UFC 319. So I'll be sharing my thoughts on the fight that took place last night in the main event of UFC 319. Now, honestly, Khamzat Chimaev put together a masterclass performance against DDP. Now, I was wrong. I personally picked DDP to weather the storm and retain his title, winning the fight by decision, but Khamzat Chimaev proved that styles makes fights in combat sports, especially in the sport of MMA. Even though this was a 50-50 fight, everybody knew Khamzat Chimaev's bread and butter was his wrestling background, that freestyle wrestling background that he possesses. But nobody knew that it was going to be a massacre from rounds 1 through 5 in clear dominating fashion the way how it was. I mean, the stats were insane last night. I mean, Khamzat Chimaev scored a total of 12 takedowns. He was in control for 21 minutes, 40 seconds in this fight of control time. 510 total strikes landed in a 5-round championship fight against an elite fighter that was, heading into the weekend, a top 10 pound-for-pound fighter in DDP. And Khamzat Chimaev basically was having his way, landing the takedowns, on control, smothering DDP. There was no chance of survival for DDP. And basically all the rounds that I scored, it was 10-8 rounds up until the 5th round where DDP showed some sort of life in that final round of the 5 championship rounds. But for Khamzat Chimaev, he has really shut me up because one of the reasons why I did pick DDP to win this fight was due to the fact that DDP was riding on an 11-fight winning streak that dated back to 2019. He was undefeated in the UFC since joining the roster. And he has weathered the storm against the best middleweights that there are in the world today. Talk about Robert Whittaker. Defeated Sean Strickland twice. First man to ever submit Israel Adesanya, one of the greatest middleweight fighters of all time. This is the run that DDP was on. But Khamzat Chimaev weathered the storm. He proved me wrong to the point where I didn't know if Khamzat Chimaev was going to be willing to swim in the deep waters for the championship rounds. Excuse me. All of Khamzat Chimaev's MMA fights up until this point have never went past 5 rounds. So that was a concern to me. The cardiovascular endurance, what happens if this fight goes past the 3rd round? What if this fight was competitive 50-50? But it was never 50-50. Once that first takedown landed, I think everybody at home, watching around the world, wherever you were watching the fight, or even in the arena if you were lucky enough to watch UFC 319 in Chicago, once he landed those takedowns, I think we all knew where the fight was going to be. But I thought DDP was going to be able to stuff the takedowns. But Khamzat Chimaev proved me wrong. Dominant performance in his first ever 5-round championship fight. Landed the takedowns with ease. Being comfortable to smother DDP on the ground. Mixing in the strikes to the head, to the body. Landing the knees to the sternum as well. Making DDP very uncomfortable. This was an insane masterclass performance. True belt-to-ass treatment that Khamzat Chimaev gave DDP in the main event of UFC 319, and also proved why that even though that DDP could have been the one to stuff the takedowns and kind of had a similar format or similar game plan to what Kamaru Usman had a few years ago when he shared the octagon with Khamzat Chimaev in terms of stuffing the takedown and being prepared for the wrestling strategy, DDP didn't do that. And Khamzat Chimaev, I'm just so proud of the performance that he had. True masterclass performance. Proved me wrong and proved to me that he is the future of the UFC. New undisputed middleweight champion. But Khamzat Chimaev is now 15-0 in his MMA career. Impressive wins now at the middleweight division against DDP, Robert Whittaker. Also, honorable mentions of what he's done in the past, fighting Kamaru Usman. Well, actually, he did beat Kamaru Usman at middleweight, so I'll count that too. When he defeated Kamaru Usman at middleweight, even though Kamaru Usman took the fight on I think it was a 12 to 9 day notice, but still, you defeated one of the greatest of all time at the welterweight division of Kamaru Usman. That has to be recognized as an all-time great win for him. and Gilbert Burns. So Khamzat Chimaev is getting the names. He has the title. And now I think we're going to see a huge run out of Khamzat Chimaev that we're probably not going to see in a very long time. He is the boogeyman of this division, and I don't see anybody taking this title away from him anytime soon. But I will give credit to the former champion here, DDP. He left his heart and his soul all in that octagon, because there could have been plenty of times where he could have been frustrated. He was just pinned down, getting beat down, but the man never quit. He was in there for 5 rounds, and he was surviving to take the punishment. He could have easily submitted his way out of the fight if Khamzat Chimaev got more comfortable gaining control with the submissions, if he could have found his footing doing that. But getting taken down several times, going to the ground, and even showing some type of life in the 5th round, I give DDP a lot of credit in the world for continuing to fight all the way until the final bell has rung. And actually, it was one point in the fight, very late in the 5th round, where DDP was in control for a small amount of time, but he nearly locked in a rear naked choke on Khamzat Chimaev, or it might not have been a rear naked choke, but he nearly got a choke on Khamzat Chimaev's neck to the point where I was like, whoa, there's a chance. But it was only 28 seconds left in the fight. But I give DDP a lot of credit in the world for fighting all the way to the end, a valiant effort on his part. But a new king has been crowned at the middleweight division, and his name is Khamzat Chimaev. So to close out the segment, I'll be discussing what's next for the respective fighters moving forward. So what's next for Khamzat Chimaev? Now, I think Khamzat Chimaev, he just stated in the UFC conferences following UFC 319, following his win against DDP, that there was no injury sustained. And obviously, when you're in control for 21 minutes and 40 seconds of control time in the fight, he could be available for UFC 321 that will take place at Abu Dhabi before the year is over. Based on the performance that he had against DDP, the outstanding wrestling, the takedowns, and landing 12 takedowns, having a control time for nearly 25 minutes of a 5-round championship fight against an elite fighter like DDP, who the hell is going to take the title away from him? I don't see that happening anytime soon in Khamzat Chimaev's future. But I will say an opponent next for him could be Imavov. If you guys remember, Imavov did defeat Israel Adesanya, had an impressive 2nd-round knockout against him earlier in the year. I think that could be a big championship fight that could take place for UFC 321 in Abu Dhabi between Khamzat Chimaev and Imavov. That could be a fight that could be lined up next at the middleweight division. Whether that happens for UFC 321 or towards the beginning part of 2026, I can see that happening next. What's next for DDP? I think DDP still has a tremendous future in the UFC, and one loss doesn't define a fighter in combat sports. And DDP was on a pretty good run at the middleweight division. He just ran into a big freight train in Khamzat Chimaev, a nightmare matchup-wise for anybody on the UFC roster right now. But I don't think DDP will get the immediate rematch, as we know. I think that's pretty obvious based on how the fight went. But perhaps a rematch against Israel Adesanya could boost the confidence of back up for DDP. If you guys look back at that fight, there were sequences where that fight was pretty close last summer when they fought around this time. But that could be in the works. Anthony Hernandez, someone that is climbing up the ranks in this middleweight division as well. I think that could be a good fight for DDP as well. So DDP is going to have a big fight whenever he returns back to the octagon, but it just won't be for a middleweight title shot, immediate UFC middleweight title shot against Khamzat Chimaev. But those are my thoughts on the fight that took place last night between Dricus Du Plessis and Khamzat Chimaev.